She arrived at the city hospital just before sunrise, with a child in her arms and nothing else. His body was burning up, soaked in sweat, and frighteningly still. The little boy, who used to hum quietly while stacking bottle caps on the kitchenette, who used to tug on her dress every time he wanted to be picked up, now lay limp against her shoulder, his head rolling with each shaky step she took. She had wrapped him in their last remaining blanket, the one that still smelled faintly of the soap she used to wash clothes in a bucket behind the house. Everything else had been sold: the mattress, the stove, the fan, even the old clock. From the wall, one by one, she had let them go, until the only thing left was him. She never looked back. There was no point in mourning a home that could no longer shelter them. Her eyes were fixed on the glass doors ahead, the ones that reflected the first orange line of sun on her face as she crossed the threshold. Inside, the cold air wrapped around her like a second skin. Bright lights buzzed above white tile. The smell of antiseptic and metal filled her nostrils. People rushed past without seeing her. Nurses in quiet sneakers, doctors in long coats. The occasional shout from an overhead speaker. She looked down at her son's face. His mouth had parted slightly, and his chest moved, but barely. She tried to speak, but the words didn't come. Her voice cracked open like something unused, rusted. Finally, she found someone, a woman behind the reception desk, and placed the boy gently onto the counter. The woman's eyes widened. She reached for the phone and began speaking rapidly. Moments later, a gurney appeared, then hands. Steady, practiced, urgent. They lifted him away from her without a word. The woman at the desk told her to wait, that they were taking him to the ICU, that she couldn't go past those doors. Then they disappeared with her entire world, and she was left holding only the weight of her empty arms. She stood there for minutes that felt like entire days. She didn't know what to do. Sit? Walk? Pray? She glanced at the waiting room, the rows of plastic chairs bolted to the floor, the vending machine blinking red, a few silent faces staring at walls. But she didn't feel like she belonged there. Her clothes were still damp from the bus ride. Her shoes were old and thin-soled, worn down from months of walking through gravel and mud. Her hands shook, her body hurt, her stomach ached with hunger, but she remained still. Her mind kept replaying the moment her boy began to seize, hours ago, in the back of their one-room house. His lips had turned pale. His limbs had gone stiff. She had carried him for nearly 3 miles before reaching the main road. And then she waited for a bus she couldn't afford until a stranger, a man who didn't even ask her name, gave her enough money to board. She never forgot his face. She whispered a thank you to the sky for him as she sat down in a plastic chair and waited for someone to tell her whether or not her child was still alive. But the hours passed, and no one came. When she asked for updates, the woman at the front desk gave the same sentence every time. He's still in intensive care. That's all we know. Please wait here. The words carved into her like a dull knife. Still in intensive care. Still. 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 She clung to that word like it meant safety. As long as he was still there, she had hope. She didn't need news. She didn't need numbers or diagnoses. She just needed that word. The chair grew colder beneath her. The sun moved across the glass ceiling above, casting long stripes of light on the floor. Around her, people came and went. Visitors brought bags of food. Some walked out crying. Others left with smiles. But no one spoke to her. No one asked why she hadn't moved. By evening, her legs were stiff. Her eyes burned. Her hands trembled. Each time she reached into her bag to feel the last piece of bread she hadn't touched since morning, she didn't eat it. She couldn't. Not while he was in there, starving for air. Eventually, the lights dimmed. The front desk closed. The waiting room emptied. She stood up slowly and walked out through the same glass doors she had entered that morning. She didn't go far. Just a few steps to the right, under a rusted emergency sign, there was a concrete bench pressed against the wall. She sat on it, like it had been waiting for her. It was hard and cold and stained by years of neglect, but it was the closest she could be to him. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders, placed the backpack beneath her feet, and folded herself into a shape small enough to be ignored. That night, the city hummed with distant traffic and low voices. She kept her eyes on the hospital entrance, even as the cold gnawed at her joints and the street lamp above her flickered. Each time the doors opened, she lifted her head. Each time they closed, she dropped it again. There was no sleep, only waiting, and beneath it, fear. A fear so deep, it lived in her bones. What if he slipped away in the dark? What if she never got to say goodbye? What if she had come all this way, only to lose him on the other side of a wall she couldn't pass through? But she did not cry. She couldn't afford to. Every part of her needed to stay strong, for him. Because if he ever opened his eyes again and looked for her, she had to be right there, close enough for him to find her, close enough to remind him that he wasn't alone, that he never had been. She didn't know it yet, but that bench would become her home. That concrete slab exposed to wind and sun would be the place where she would measure time by footsteps, by ambulance sirens, by the flicker of lights from a building where her son lay connected to machines, fighting to breathe. And she would remain unmoving, unshowered, unseen, waiting for a miracle no one could promise. Because for her there was no other place to be. By the second morning, the bench no longer felt like a choice. It had become a sentence. The mother sat with her knees pulled up, her blanket tucked tightly around her shoulders, and her face tilted slightly toward the hospital doors. Her back ached. Her lips had started to crack. She hadn't washed her hands in almost 2 days, hadn't brushed her hair since the night before the seizure. She had stopped counting hours because the only time that mattered was the moment someone would finally walk out and say, "You can see him now?" But no one did. The doors kept opening, but never for her. People passed by, visitors in clean clothes, workers in uniforms, delivery men wheeling carts, and not one of them stopped to ask who she was or what she was doing there. She wasn't yelling, she wasn't causing trouble, and so she was invisible. That morning, it rained. Not a storm, just a slow, steady drizzle that soaked everything it touched. She didn't move. She couldn't. If she left the bench, someone might come out and speak her son's name. What if that moment happened while she was searching for a bathroom or trying to find food or looking for somewhere dry? She stayed seated, pulling the blanket over her head, letting the cold water slip down her back and pool in her shoes. Her skirt clung to her legs. Her breath steamed in the air. No one offered her shelter. No one handed her an umbrella. They walked past her like she was furniture, something old, inconvenient, meant to be overlooked. By midday, her stomach twisted so tightly it made her gasp. She reached into her bag and broke off a corner of the bread she'd been saving. It was damp and soft now, but she forced herself to chew slowly, swallowing with difficulty. She had no water left. The bottle had been empty since yesterday, and the vending machines inside required coins she didn't have. She considered asking someone just for water, nothing else. But the thought died as soon as it arrived. Every face that passed her had the same expression: hurry, duty, distance. Even the hospital staff barely glanced in her direction. She had tried once the night before to ask a nurse about her son. The woman had nodded politely, said she would check, and never came back. She began to learn the rhythms of the building, at what hour the ambulances arrived, when the security guards changed shifts, the difference between the footsteps of doctors and the slower pace of cleaners. She learned that people only noticed you when you got in their way. So she stayed small. She didn't ask questions anymore, didn't speak. Her voice felt useless. Instead, she listened. Through the glass, she could sometimes hear fragments of conversations, medical terms, codes, numbers. None of it made sense to her. But she waited for one word. Boy. If someone mentioned a boy, a child, anything that might be about her son, but it never came. The third night was the hardest so far. Her body was beginning to shut down. Sleep came in small fragments, 5 minutes, maybe 10, before the pain in her hips or the sting in her feet woke her up again. Her muscles cramped. Her eyes felt swollen. Her skin itched from the dampness that never seemed to dry. She had used the bathroom once that day in a gas station across the street. The attendant made her buy something to use it, so she handed over the last coin she had. All that, sacrifice for a cracked toilet and a broken lock. When she came back, she was terrified that she had missed someone calling her, but nothing had changed. Her son was still a name hidden behind doors she couldn't walk through. The bench had begun to mark her, not just physically, but emotionally. It was no longer just a place to sit. It was a symbol of her exclusion, a message repeated by everyone who passed her by. You do not belong here. You are not part of this world. The world of visitors and medical updates and warm coffee and extra blankets. That world was for people with homes, people who could shower before coming, people who had cell phones and emergency contacts, and someone to call. She had no one, not a single person. She couldn't even borrow a phone to ask for help because there was no one to call. The house she left behind was empty. The neighbors who once smiled at her now pretended not to know her name. She began to speak quietly to herself, just small things. A memory here and there, his first word, the way he used to laugh when she made animal sounds. She whispered stories to the wind as if it could carry them into the ICU. She told him that she was there, that she hadn't moved, that no matter what happened, he would never be alone. Her voice was hoarse, her lips trembled, but she kept speaking. Even if he couldn't hear her, maybe someone, something, would. That night, sometime after midnight, a janitor stopped a few feet away. He glanced at her for a moment. He didn't say anything, didn't offer her help, didn't ask her story. He just looked. And in that split second, she realized something deeper than pain. People weren't avoiding her out of cruelty. They were avoiding her because she made them uncomfortable. Her presence was a reminder that tragedy could happen to anyone, that life was fragile, that sometimes love isn't enough to protect the people we hold closest. She made the world look at something it didn't want to see. A mother on a bench, praying in silence, drying her tears in a hospital's shadow. She didn't hate them for it. She understood. But it didn't make the waiting any easier. By the fourth day, she no longer recognized herself. Something inside her had gone quiet, like a candle running out of air. The exhaustion wasn't just physical anymore. It had sunk deeper, into her chest, into the small trembling place between her ribs where a mother stores the fear she never says out loud. She had stopped expecting someone to come out of the hospital. She no longer looked up every time the glass doors opened. The hope that once made her heart leap now sat quietly beside her, like a child too tired to cry. She had not spoken a full sentence in 2 days. There was no one to speak to. Her voice had dried up like her skin, cracked and tight from the sun that scorched her during the day and the cold wind that scraped across her back at night. Her body had begun to betray her, muscles refusing to stretch, her knees locking, her vision blurring whenever she stood up too fast. She had not eaten anything since that last piece of bread, and even water was a memory. The thirst hurt more than hunger. Her mouth felt full of ash, her tongue heavy and useless. But she remained exactly where she had always been, as if she were a stone set into the bench. It wasn't loyalty that kept her there anymore. It was something stranger, something almost sacred. She had started to believe that if she left, even for a moment, something would break. That maybe her son was alive only because she was still waiting. That her stillness had become part of the fragile balance keeping him breathing, as if some unseen thread stretched between her chest and his, and if she moved too far, it would snap. So she stayed, eyes half closed, mind slipping in and out of waking. Her thoughts were no longer linear. They moved like fog, thick, slow, impossible to hold. At times she imagined he had already died and no one had told her. At other times she could hear his laugh in her ears, clear as if he were sitting beside her again. She didn't know what was real anymore. It was sometime in the late afternoon when she heard the voice, not someone speaking to her, not yet, just a voice, through the wall of glass. A woman, maybe a nurse, speaking quickly to someone else. And in that stream of medical words and instructions, she heard it, the word boy. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even certain, but it was enough. Her head snapped up, her breath caught in her throat. She pressed her hand against the glass, too weak to stand, but desperate to listen. But the conversation ended. The woman disappeared, and the doors stayed closed. That was the moment the silence changed. Not outside. The street noises still hummed. The hospital machines still beeped faintly through the wall. No, the silence inside her changed. It became heavier. It settled over her heart like a thick, invisible cloth. She realized then that she was not just waiting. She was grieving, slowly, quietly, without permission, grieving the life she thought she had, the future she had dreamed for her child, the innocence of believing that love could protect them from this kind of suffering. She had spent her whole life holding him, sheltering him from broken things, broken bottles on the street, broken people in the neighborhood, broken promises from those who said they'd help. But now there was nothing left for her to shield him from. He was beyond her reach. And that was the cruelest part. A mother's arms are never supposed to be empty while her child still breathes. She looked down at her hands. They were dirty, the nails split, the skin raw from gripping the edge of the bench for so long. These were hands that had carried him through floods, through hunger, through winters without blankets. These were the same hands that had wiped his fevered face with a wet cloth when the pharmacy closed early. The same hands that had taught him how to write his name with a stub of chalk on the back of a cereal box. Now they were useless. There was nothing left to hold, nothing left to fix. Her hands, once so full of purpose, now rested in her lap like dead birds. When the wind picked up again, it brought a colder scent, antiseptic and asphalt, rain and iron. She shivered. Her body had stopped producing enough heat. Even the blanket felt foreign now, heavy and damp. She could feel her heartbeat slow. It frightened her for a moment, but then she let the fear go. Not because it faded, but because she had no room left for it. She was already filled with something else, surrender. Not the kind that gives up, but the kind that understands the limits of flesh, of strength, of time. She wondered if anyone had noticed her, if the nurses inside ever whispered about the woman on the bench, if someone had written a report, passed it around, decided she wasn't their problem. Or maybe she had become part of the landscape, like the cracks in the pavement or the peeling paint on the hospital's side wall. People don't notice things that don't move. And she had stopped moving a long time ago. Still, she whispered to him that night, like every night, just in case he could hear her through the walls, through the wires, through the deep fog of machines. She told him she was still here, that no matter what they said or didn't say, she would not leave, that if he opened his eyes even for a second, he would find her, and that her voice, soft, steady, always waiting, would guide him back from wherever he was floating. She didn't know if it mattered, but she whispered anyway because it was all she had left. It was just after dawn when she felt the shift. Not in her body. Her body had long stopped registering the difference between night and morning, but in the air. Something subtle, something quiet. The hospital doors slid open again like they had 1,000 times before, but this time there were no footsteps rushing out, no crowd passing through, just one woman. She wore a pale uniform, her hair pulled back, her face soft with fatigue. She walked slowly, deliberately, like she had come looking for someone. The mother didn't lift her head right away. Her neck was stiff, her eyelids heavy. But the sound of those steps, slow, steady, getting closer, pulled something awake inside her. She opened her eyes just as the nurse stopped in front of the bench. For a moment, they just looked at each other, one standing, one slumped low against concrete, both of them worn in ways the world rarely sees. The nurse spoke gently, as if afraid the words might hurt. "Are you the mother of the little boy in the pediatric ICU?" she asked. The mother's lips parted, but no sound came. She nodded barely. It was all she could manage. "We've been trying to reach you," the nurse said. "He's awake." He opened his eyes during the night. The world did not explode in joy. There was no music, no rush of celebration, only stillness, a long, stunned stillness that sat heavy between them. The nurse kept speaking, but her voice drifted. "He's still very weak, still on oxygen, but he's breathing on his own now. He asked for his mother." Those words, simple, plain, cut through everything. He asked for his mother. After 4 days of silence, 4 days of wondering if he would ever open his eyes again, those words were a lifeline. The mother tried to stand, her legs folded. The nurse reached out, steadied her, helped her rise with both arms. Every muscle screamed, her spine protested, her heart pounded like it wasn't sure it knew how to keep going. But she stood, slowly, painfully, and she took the first step toward the doors. They didn't open right away. It took a moment for the motion sensor to register her presence, as if even the glass had forgotten she existed. But then they slid apart, and for the first time in days, she crossed the threshold. Inside, everything was the same. The polished floor, the soft buzz of machines, the scent of antiseptic. But she felt like a stranger walking into her own life. The nurse led her down a hallway, into a quieter wing. A door opened. A light blinked softly in a room filled with wires and machines. And there he was, small, pale, but alive. His eyes fluttered, open as the sound of the door clicked. He turned his head, slow and weak, and looked at her. And in that instant, the weight of 4 days disappeared. Not because the pain was gone, but because she had arrived in time. She was not too late. He had waited for her the same way she had waited for him. She walked to the bed and took his hand. It was smaller than she remembered, but warm. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His fingers curled around hers and her knees gave out. She sat beside the bed and pressed her forehead to his chest, listening to the soft, real rhythm of his breath. Later, the doctors would come. Papers would be signed. Arrangements would be made. She still had no home to take him to, no money, no answers for what came next. But none of that mattered in that room. For now, there was breath. There was warmth. There was the boy who had returned from silence and the mother who had never left. And outside, the bench sat empty for the first time in 4 days. Rain had washed over it. Wind had dried it. The world had turned unaware. But for one woman, that bench had been everything: a home, a grave, a prayer, and a promise. She never sat on it again.